What's going on? This is Diane. Thank you for joining me on San Francisco News. This is our COVID protocol edition, so to speak, because we are now practicing COVID protocol safety. So we're not in the studio. But guess what? That doesn't stop us because of the modern media. We love technology. We are now SFN, television for San Francisco News. And we're very excited about that. We did write San Francisco News, and we'll leave that there for a little while until people get used to SFN. What better way to celebrate Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday than to mention voting? Are you registered to vote? I'm sure that you are, but if you're not, many people died to vote. Please participate. The next election is on February the 15th, and this is the best thing that I could do starting off this segment of San Francisco News, which this segment is in honor of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The election highlights. Ballots will be mailed to all registered voters. This means any registered voter may vote by mail starting January the 17th. Let me put my glasses back on. I apologize. Ballots began arriving in voters' mailboxes. January 18th, City Hall Voting Center opens. January 31st, the last day to register to vote and receive a ballot by mail. Again, January 31st is the last day to vote and receive a ballot by mail. After January 31st, anyone who is eligible to vote can still register conditionally. February conditionally and vote provisionally. What that means, if you're not registered, you have your identification, you can show up at any poll and vote provisionally. Voting provisionally means that the poll worker must give you a ballot, and at that time you can vote, and your vote will be counted. And on Election Day, City Hall, on February 5th and 6th, because Election Day is the 15th, on February the 5th and 6th, the City Hall Voting Center will be open during the weekends before Election Day. The weekend hours are from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Election Day, February 15th, all polling places are open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. They need a lot of poll workers. Could you use $240 and do some good? That's a wonderful opportunity to, it's actually like volunteering because it's $240. But more importantly, if you don't need the money, you can always donate it. We have many causes and you can find some on your own. But nevertheless, if you're interested in becoming a poll worker, poll workers are very, very much needed. And please visit sanfranciscoelections.org/PWA. Or if you want to work the polls on February 15th, call 415-554-4395. 415-554-5315. Excuse me. I'm sorry. 415-554-4395. That shows my humanity. I do make mistakes like everyone else. When you call that number, they'll give you all the information that you need because there's training involved and there's various positions that are open. Some involve opening the polls, some involve closing the polls, some involve staying there all day, some involve going from one election site to another, or a particular district, and collecting votes. So it's very important work. Dr. Martin Luther King will be proud. What a great way that we're honoring him today by the fact that we are conscious that February 15th is the date of election. And the last day to register by mail, the last day to register if you want to vote by mail is January 31st. Continuing with honoring Dr. Martin Luther King, there is an organization called Because of Them We Can. Because of Dr. Martin Luther King the civil rights organizations, and the active, honest religious groups, we are able to even have the conversation about voting and how they're dismantling. I was a child when Dr. Martin Luther King marched on Washington. I was 12 years old. But we learned a lot. And because of them and the efforts of others before us, because of my efforts, my son, who is going to be my biggest contribution to the community of San Francisco and the world at large, because of my mother's efforts, I can. Because of my efforts, it will help empower him. And because of the efforts of all of like-minded people, because it wasn't a black thing. We don't have time for a black thing. It's a human condition. And there were many people there. And because of them, we can. And this is the pledge from the organization, because of them, we can. And I think it's worthy of noting and honoring on this day that we're celebrating Dr. Martin Luther King. And we're going to celebrate him all year because his work is still active. The voting rights that was passed is being challenged. So this is the pledge that I make, and I ask you to join me. The pledge: I will honor the sacrifices of my ancestors. I will believe in me. I will pursue my dreams. I will help others along the way. Vote and become social and politically active. Become change agents. I want to give a shout out to a change agent that I know that personally that's absolutely phenomenal. And that's Karen Clopton, actually Judge Karen Clopton. But we're going to honor Karen Clopton as the chairman, as the director, the president, of the Human Rights Commission. She's a change agent. Look it up. Don't forget to make sure that you understand what Dr. Martin Luther King did for all of us. Black, white, yellow, red. I have a quote for you from Maya Angelou. We need joy as we need air. We need love as we need water. We need each other as we need the earth we share. Maya Angelou. We honor Dr. Martin Luther King today. Dr. Martin Luther King was a social activist and Baptist minister who played a key role in the American Civil Rights Movement from the mid-1950s until his assassination in 1968. Dr. King sought equality and human rights for African Americans, the economically disadvantaged, and all victims of injustice through peaceful protest. He was the driving force behind watershed events. A watershed event means a time when an important change happens. Was he a change agent or not? Yes. Such as the Montgomery bus boycott and the 1963 March on Washington, which helped bring about such landmark legislation as the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, which is under attack right now. Dr. King was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964 and is remembered each year on Martin Luther King Day, a U.S. federal holiday since 1986. The King family had been living in Montgomery for less than a year when the highly segregated city became the epicenter of the burgeoning struggle for civil rights in America, galvanized by the landmark Brown versus the Board of Education. If you're not familiar with Brown versus the Board of Education, look it up. The decision was in 1954. In Brown versus the Board of Education, of course I'm going to share it with you, In Brown versus the Board of Education, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled unanimously that racial segregation in public schools violated the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. In 1954, the decision declared the separate educational facilities for white and African American students were inherently unequal. On December 1, 1955, Rosa Parks, secretary to the local chapter of the NAACP, National Advancement for the Association of Colored People, refused to give up her seat to a white passenger on a Montgomery bus and was arrested. Activists coordinated a bus boycott that will continue for 381 days. The Montgomery bus boycott placed a severe economic strain on the public transit system and businesses downtown. Thus, the change. While no one took the bus, this was the Montgomery Improvement Association, which organized a bus boycott of the Montgomery buses. Montgomery Improvement Association organized the boycott of Montgomery's buses. In 1955, the Women's Political Council issued a leaflet calling for a boycott of Montgomery buses. We love to see some organizations issue directives or suggestions so that people that are African Americans, black people, brown people, people that are at a disadvantage, that they don't spend their money with the very people that would oppress them. And in that light, in 1955, 3 years after I was born, the Women's Political Council issued a leaflet calling for a boycott of Montgomery buses. And it said, don't ride the bus to work, to town, to school, or any place, starting Monday, December the 5th. Another Negro woman was arrested and put in jail because she refused to give up her seat. Don't ride the buses to work, to town, to school, or anywhere. If you work, take a cab, or ride, or share a ride, or walk. Did you see the help? The help shows people walking and riding with each other. And it said, come to a mass meeting on Monday at 7 o'clock at the Holt Street Baptist Church for further instruction. Montgomery officials stopped at nothing in attempting to sabotage the boycott. King and Abernathy, Dr. King and Reverend Abernathy were arrested. Violence begun during the action and continued after its conclusion. 4 churches as well as the homes of King and Abernathy were bombed, but the boycott continued. Together with Dr. Martin Luther King, Ralph Abernathy organized a Southern Christian Leadership Conference and helped lead the nonviolent struggle to overturn Jim Crow laws. The MIA had hoped for at least a 50% turnout rate among African Americans. To their surprise and delight, 99% of the city's African Americans refused to ride buses. Can we get 99% in San Francisco so we can accomplish some things in our community and other communities? People walked to work or rode their bikes, and carpools were established. Any young people getting some ideas? Any of you older people remembering the commitment and dedication that we had as baby boomers? What we grew under. We grew up under phenomenal leadership. They chose Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as the protest's leader and official spokesman. They couldn't call Dr. Martin Luther King into a room and have a meeting with him and he came out with checks or came out with contracts for him and his. He fought for everyone. He didn't make any side deals. And we're calling upon all of our ministers who have not already come to our aid. We're asking you to join Reverend Arnold Townsend, and other like-minded individuals in the clergy and not, because we must have balance. We must have diversity of thought and action to accomplish the same goal. By the time the U.S. Supreme Court ruled segregated seating on public buses unconstitutional in November 1956, King, heavily influenced by Mahatma Gandhi and another activist, Bayard Rustin, had entered the national spotlight. King also became a target for white supremacists who firebombed his family home in January. On September 1958, Izola Ware Curry walked into a Harlem department store where Dr. King was signing books and asked, "Are you Martin Luther King?" When he replied yes, she stabbed him in the chest with a knife. That's an instance where the person that was sent to kill them looked just like them. So we must be very careful. I say let's all unite. We can't afford just a black thing. We can't. Dr. Martin Luther King knew that. Isaiah Ware Curry came in and asked, "Are you Dr. Martin Luther King?" And she stabbed him in the chest. She was sent to assassinate him. But he survived. And the attempted assassination only reinforced his dedication to nonviolence. The experience of these past few days, he said, has deepened my faith in the relevance of the spirit of nonviolence. If necessary, social change, he said, the experience of these last few days has reinforced my faith in the relevance of the spirit of nonviolence. If necessary, social change is to peacefully take place. Letters from the Birmingham jail. Dr. King wrote, in 1960, King and his family moved to Atlanta. He joined his dad at the Ebenezer Baptist Church, but that new position didn't stop him. Their philosophy of nonviolence was put particularly to a severe test during the Birmingham campaign in 1963, in which activists used a boycott, sit-ins, and marches to protest segregation. We had Woolworths downtown. I was a child and I saw there were Woolworth counters down south where people were spitting on the protesters, throwing food on them, but they sat. They used boycotts, sit-ins, and marches to protest segregation, unfair hiring practices, and other injustices in one of America's most racially divided cities. Arrested for his involvement, on April 12, 1963, Dr. Martin Luther King and at least 55 others were jailed for parading without a permit. Kingpin, the Civil Rights Manifesto known as Letter from the Birmingham Jail, it was an eloquent defense of civil disobedience addressed to a group of white clergymen who had criticized his tactics. Disobedience addressed to a group who had criticized his tactics. March on Washington. Martin Luther King worked with a number of civil rights and religious groups to organize the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, a peaceful political rally designed to shed light on the injustices Black Americans continue to face across the country. Held on August 28th and attended by some 200 to 300,000 participants. The event is widely regarded as the Watershed Moment, another life-taking, history-changing moment, and a factor in the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The speech, "I Have a Dream," and the march cemented Dr. Martin Luther King, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s reputation at home and abroad. Later that year, he was named Man of the Year by Time magazine, and in 1964 became, at that time, the youngest person to ever receive the Nobel Peace Prize. Standing on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, a monument to the president who a century earlier had brought down the institution of slavery in the United States. He shared his vision of a future in which, quote, this nation will rise and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. All men are created equal. That's what's happening. Thank you for joining us. Thank you so much for joining us. We do have a public service announcement. I'm sorry. Public service announcements may be sent to sfnewstv@gmail.com. We received an email from Mega Black asking that the public familiarize themselves with the legislation that's going to be passed by the Board of Supervisors, or that's up for election on June the 7th. So they ask that you look at the Ethics Commission's legislation for reform, ethical reform in San Francisco. Take a look at it, and some people feel that it's fair, some people feel it's unfair. Make your own decision today, and that's what Dr. Martin Luther King fought for. That's what we fight for. We fight for the freedom to choose. We fight for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And we wait patiently, and we work patiently until freedom will ring from one end of this country to another. As Dr. Martin Luther King said, this nation will rise up. In his dream and his vision for the future, this nation will rise up and live out his creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Thank you for joining us on San Francisco News on SFN. All men are created equal. It's in the Constitution, and it's one of God's laws. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next Monday at 7:30 as we continue to honor Dr. Martin Luther King and we begin to honor Black history. Thank you. Bye-bye.